I'm reading from Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 17. As Jesus went up from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who needs a doctor, but those who are ill. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Then John's disciples came and asked him, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved."
Isaiah 40, verses 27 to 31. "But why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." Amen.
If you don't have a Bible, there are some at the back there, which you can collect from the table. Some people in life are just natural complainers. They are people who, if something goes right, remain silent. But if something goes wrong, they are manning the barricades to tell you how terrible things are. There's a tradition about church services where they used to joke that the congregation would go home to Sunday dinner and have roast pasta for the service, because they would tell each other about the shortcomings of the service. I presume in those instances that if you then said to dear Aunt Ethel, who was spending her 25 minutes telling her friend how bad the sermon was, if you invited her to preach a sermon, she wouldn't want to do it. But it's not only in churches that this happens. We complain about what the council does. We complain about what the council doesn't do. We complain about the government. We complain about all kinds of things. We complain about the schools. But when those institutions, if that's the right word, get things right, we remain silent. In reality, it would be far easier to say to somebody, I thought that has gone really well. To come to the end of a conversation with somebody who you've been ringing about your gas or electric supply and say, thank you for helping me this morning. You've really made a difference and made it easier. To when you've done with the council officers, then to say to them, thank you. Sometimes councils have a reputation for being difficult, but you're an exemplary council officer. I called in at the council office that's on King Street. We have these, in our neighbourhood anyway, we have these recycling bags that we have to put our recycling rubbish in. And I rang the door for the entry system because they don't let you in because they're wary that somebody might go in and be abusive or something. And the lady in there said, "Oh, can I help you, sir?" And I said, "Yeah, could I have a roll of those recycling bags?" And she said, of course, I'll just nip away and get one for you." And she came back with 4 rolls of recycling bags, which is more than we're going to need for a long, long time. She said, "Oh, by the way, I love your clothes." And I said, "You don't look so bad yourself," I said. And so I came away with a smile on my face because she'd done her job well and I'd complimented her, and in a totally unnecessary way, she'd complimented me. But so it goes on. Now, this passage in the Bible starts with an indication that the people of God have been complaining against God. And how true this is in life, that when something goes wrong, the first thing that people who take no notice of God for 10 or 11 months of the year, the first thing they say is, how could God let that happen? Now, why God lets certain terrible things happen is a mystery to all of us. But perhaps we would be better to weigh and understand this if we considered God throughout the year and all the things that he does. God, as they say, moves in mysterious ways. It is not always easy to understand, but it is rather unfair, it seems to me, to assume that God is not there until something goes wrong. And there are books in the Bible where prophets rail against God for what seems like unfairness, and God changes his plan. The book of Habakkuk is one of them. But here, God recognizes that those who complain against him are being unfair to him, because they say that God takes no notice of their ways and their causes and complaints are disregarded. And God says that in every way he watches what is happening. In verse 28 he says, through Isaiah the prophet, he will not grow tired or weary. I remember some years ago when it must have been either just before I became a Christian or just after I became a Christian. I remember one bishop being in the news and saying that it wasn't as though God had an answering service in heaven. And if we were all going to pray all of the time, we couldn't reasonably expect that God would hear us. And obviously people then take a different attitude and they say, be assured that God does always hear you. God does not, as it says in other places in the Bible, he doesn't slumber or sleep. And here we're told he does not grow tired or weary. He does not cease from doing good. But at the same time, it says in this verse, his understanding no one can fathom. Again, we come back to this idea of God's mysterious ways. God, as it might seem, plays the long game. He allows certain things to happen now because they mean better things in the future. But because we look at the short game, we cannot appreciate that. And it is clear here that we're not talking about some vague notion of God. When it says in verse 28, you'll see there again, the Lord is the everlasting God. The fact that the word Lord is in block capitals is we are referring here to Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God who created heaven and earth, the God who is the personal God, the God who sent Jesus. And it would be very unfair of us as we stand on the fringe of Advent, as we approached Christmas, to say God does not intervene for us. Because the thing that we know, if we observe things to be true, is that God at Christmas time has sent Jesus. There's been a little bit of a kerfuffle recently in the world of television advertising. I never really thought of Marks and Spencer's as being a very controversial shop, but they produced an advert this year for Christmas time which showed parents destroying things that they had prepared for their children because they finally got frustrated with all of the things that they have to do every year at Christmas. And it's quite interesting that people who are by nature complainers this time stopped complaining about the commerciality of Christmas. They started complaining about Marks and Spencer's. And I saw yesterday on the television that the advert in question has now been re-edited to present a positive image of family celebrations of Christmas and looking out for the children. But whatever you think about Christmas, whether you think it is a waste of money, then remember this. Christmas is not just for the children. It is for you, whether you are 9 or 90, because the heart of Christmas, as the heart of every day, as we see here, is that God intervenes. Jesus is not only the greatest man who ever lived, he is the one who came and died for the salvation of the people. I saw a short film that somebody made that said the story of the Gospels is a myth. Now, the person who'd come up with this, first of all, was obviously not much of a linguist, because the word myth is tended to be used as something that is fictitious. But the word myth also means it is something that gives a meaning to life. Now, he didn't mean this, but I'm going to go with the second version of the word myth, because of my view of the gospel is that it gives meaning to life. It gives order to the way that I live. And then sometimes people say, well, I don't believe the things that are in the Bible were said by the people it says said them. I don't believe that Jesus said those things. In this instance, I don't believe that Isaiah said those things. Now, I don't agree with that person, but if that's true, tell me who said them, because then I will be concerned with that person instead. You know, somebody once said to me that the Gospel of John was John putting words in Jesus' mouth. And that's why there were sayings there that were not found in any of the other three Gospels. And my reaction then is, what a wonderful man John must have been to enhance what Jesus said. Again, I don't believe that that is true. But this teaching in the Bible that tells us of the nature of God, that God is not vague and far away, but that God is for us and God is protecting us, this is a wonderful thing. And in verse 29 it says this, and this is speaking of God. It says, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. What a wonderful fact. You know? Again, this is not something that is age related. You know, sometimes you see a film and it says, this film has been certified 15. Not suitable for people of a younger age. Or this film is a 12 or an 18 or a PG, which apparently stands for parent or guardian advice required. But God does not deal with people according to their age. If you are weak and weary, whether you are 47 or 77, God is with you and for you, and he will give you strength and power. You know? When I was at school, I was a bit of a cheat sometimes. I don't know if you ever did this at school, but we had cross-country running. And I wasn't a bad cross-country runner, but some of my friends just didn't like cross-country running. And we'd figured out a point on the run where if you snuck off with a can of pop or something, then you could rejoin the race next time it came around. And instead of finishing at the back, you finish maybe 5th or 6th. Now that's cheating. It may have in a fun sort of way. It might have its commendable things that makes you smile. But God makes it in the race of life that you don't have to cheat. He gives you the wisdom to rest when you need to rest, but sometimes also when you are weary, He gives you the strength to carry on. When you are weak, He gives you power. You know, we are people who can continue to live our lives even when it seems hopeless. We can continue to talk about our faith even when it would be easier to be quiet. And we can support one another even when we are tired and it would perhaps be easier to give up. You know, there was a song in the 1960s, which I think the Hollies recorded in the first place, for those who might remember that, slightly before I was aware of these things, called "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother." And the whole idea of the song was that even though the individual person was tired, then because the other person was someone he loved, he could carry him along the way. And then a gospel singer took this idea in the 1980s and added another flavor to it, because he realized that the whole idea of loving our neighbor is encapsulated in that. And in some ways, these are such deeply wonderful pop songs that even if we don't like pop songs, we get the heart of what's being said. Another one out there, you know, lean on me when you're in trouble. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. For it won't be long before I'm going to need somebody to lean on. And that is one of these songs that continually rises back to the top, because in every generation, the message of it remains relevant. And it says here, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. What we have lost, we will gain again. You know, there's a thing here that I have to kind of twist my mind a little bit to understand here in verse 31. It says they will soar on wings like eagles. And my difficulty on this is I don't know what it feels like to soar like an eagle. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't believe in reincarnation. And even if I did, I would have no previous memory of having been a bird once upon a time. And so I don't know what it is to soar on wings like eagles. But ever since I have been a child, one of my favorite music groups were a band called Eagles. And the thing that was known about the Eagles was their distinctive soaring harmonies. They sang, 5 of them in the band, and they sang like almost like they were one voice. And you'd go and see them in concert, and they could reproduce that sound like they were on the record again, you know? And so in that way, although I can't really understand what it is to fly like a bird, I can understand what it is to rise above the mere weaknesses of the ordinary human voice and have something that becomes beautiful because men with a different range sing together. And we see this in choirs and all kinds of situations. Just so much happens that this particular band were also called Eagles. So when I hear this particular verse, that's where my mind goes, because the other thing is perhaps a little bit above and beyond my understanding. It then says, they will run and not grow weary. As I say, when I was a cross-country runner, albeit in a very amateur basis, I never took much of the chance of getting weary because I joined my friends in cheating. But when I swim, I have quite a distinctive thing going on for me, in that I've never been a fast swimmer, but somewhere along the line, I have the stamina to swim long distances at a very steady pace, and therefore swim and swim and swim and swim. So I can't say that I've ever really tried very much to run and not grow weary. When we go on holiday to the seaside, I say to Isabel every year, I said, let's get up early in the morning every year, every day, and go for a run along the beach. And she says to me, you can if you like, but I'm not coming, which then kind of takes away the impetus to do that, because if you're running as a pair or in a small group, then that's easier than running on your own. But also, it says here, they will walk and not be faint. And I used to be quite a fast walker. I notice now when I'm walking along the pavement on King Street, there are people passing me all the time. So I think I must have got slower. But I also noticed that since I got my glasses, I don't trip or fall like I used to do. I remember once a few years ago coming up King Street, and I don't know what I did, but just simply because I couldn't see the pavement properly, I fell full length. And all of a sudden, two guys who were sitting outside one of the coffee shops grabbed me and picked me up by the arms and put me back on my feet. And then you feel kind of embarrassed, really, because it's not what you want to have done for you. And there was the year when Isabel and I were in Whitby, and I decided the best way to get to the bottom of the stairs was to do a forward roll down them involuntarily. But they've kind of fixed my eyes to the extent now that I'm not in danger of doing that very often anymore. And so, a bit like the experience of God being with us, we can walk and not be faint. That doesn't mean we won't ever fall down, but it does mean that we will walk better than we would do if God wasn't with us. Don't let yourself get distracted, though. Keep your mind on where you're going and where you're putting your feet, as well as on God, because you don't want to take things for granted. So 3 things really for you today. First of all, in the first few verses we read, try to avoid complaining. It really doesn't do us much good. Secondly, be aware that God is always watching, and when we pray, He's always listening. And thirdly, God is the one who is always restoring. When we're tired and weary, when we are running out of energy. He will renew our strength. We will soar like eagles. We will run and not grow weary, and we will walk and not be faint. Amen.